gia và cái lực lượng lao động phải đi làm, phải dùng cái học của mình đó, yêu cho nó là you learn and then you serve for the country, you serve for your people, help people.
My name is Kevin Vong, or Kevin Vuong. My Vietnamese name is Kai Vinh, and I am the first in my family to be born and raised here in Canada. My parents were boat people.
My name is Huy Nguyen. I'm originally from Vietnam. I'm approximately 51 years old. I've been here in Canada since 1981.
And I'm Naomi. I am 21 years old, Canadian resident, born here.
My name is Sheena. I'm 19 years old. I grew up in the neighborhood of Parkdale, which was in Toronto.
So my name is Albert. I'm born and raised in Ottawa, but my family was born in Vietnam and they immigrated to Montreal.
I didn't say the North is bad, but the history, the truth is the truth. No nothing. How can you survive without the money? Everything collapsed. So we have no choice. We have to try to escape from Vietnam to another country. That's the story. We are the boat people. Bắt đầu từ năm 75 á, thì the war is finished from north to south. Okay. Có nhiều cái hệ lụy nó xảy đến cho cái người miền Nam, nhất là cái người miền Nam.
Đi bên khỏi city.
Đi bên khỏi city.
Rừng á. Dạ, rừng làm rẫy rồi đó.
Because when following the war, my parents are actually of Chinese descent, so they're part of the Chinese diaspora in Vietnam. And my understanding is following the war, the Chinese business class in particular, which my father belonged to, was persecuted.
As 11 years old, all I know is to line up to get the food, help the family, go to school education. But back then, apart from that, you're having fun, just like a child. You don't really know what's going on. You don't understand what it really is. In 1975, when the war ended, apart that, we're not aware of anything, except that my dad was in the prison camp. This is in the army for the South. So I did miss my dad. We didn't see him. He passed away after 1978 when we left. He decided to stay back because he didn't think it's going to be a major thing. He's probably thinking that I go to prison for a few years and then be out. But he never come back.
We going to the sea. We don't know where we going.
Okay. So picture the ship you go.
Wait, we don't know exactly what we're going, and we don't know what country we're going to go. Just need the freedom to left, escape.
They were attacked by pirates 3 times. The first time they took all of what little valuables they had. The second time they took what supplies there were, so food and water. And in the third time, my father tells me they took people. And so the pirates, he distinctly told me that he remembers the pirates taking 3 women. They could have been mothers, sisters, daughters, who knows, but he wonders sometimes about what happened to them, what their fate was.
Bạn cô nhiều đứa nó đi là coi như lên đên cả nửa tháng trời. Khi mà vớt
không
cuộc
còn mà hết cả nước rồi.
Dạ. Thì người ta ăn thịt với nhau. Con tưởng tượng người ta ăn thịt với nhau á. Người chết á.
They eat it.
They eat. Nó nằm trên tàu á, nó nằm bẹp luôn, nó ói mửa này kia, cái đầu nó đó nằm, tại vì những cái xà nó đấm bằng dầu chai, không biết không, cái dầu mà để đấm cho nó láng cái mặt ghe đó. Khi đi vậy trời nóng á, trời nóng xuống á, cái đó nó chảy ra không, mấy đứa nhỏ nó nằm nó không ngồi vậy được, ói nó mệt, nó lẳng rồi, cái đầu á tắt chứ.
He thought, I think the impression was that if you leave Vietnam, that's like you're done, you're ready, like you've escaped. But really, that's when you realize like refugee camp is a whole other like political hurdle on its own, because you have to deal with all the paperwork. These UN, I think they were UN funded refugee camps, were not funded enough, so like there's really bad because there's very poor quality of life in the refugee camps. And I think one of the camps he ended up staying at had more people commit suicide on the island than people who actually passed away from escaping.
Like even if I asked any sort of specific questions, I know one time I asked, "Hey mom, when you were in a refugee camp, how did you deal with your period?" And my mom was like, "Oh, we just dealt with it in like the way you can in those circumstances," which didn't really answer my question, but it just gave me like an idea of like it was just terrible in the refugee camp.
There's an ever-increasing sea rescue operation in the South China Sea, which of course includes American ships. Tonight, we begin a series on the Vietnamese refugees. Jim Laurie has been on special assignment.
The exodus grew to flood proportions early this year, and in 6 months, Southeast Asian nations have been inundated. Malaysia, 77,000. Hong Kong, 66,000. Indonesia, at least 55,000.
There were stories, I was told, that apparently the U.S. Navy were just outside in international waters waiting to rescue people. Those proved to be myths.
Cũng
Dạ,
có
dạ,
nhiều
có
kiểu đó
nhiều
cộng
lắm.
đồng người Séc từ Poland là nhiều.
Còn Mỹ á, thì nó không có nhận liền. Mỹ thì nó lại gửi mình vô cái nước thứ nhì để nó thanh lọc. Nó kêu thanh lọc á.
Philippines, qua Philippines để nó thành lập.
Bi Đông để nó thanh lọc. Đúng theo cái diện mà tị nạn chính trị á, hồ sơ mình khai với lại phỏng vấn á, chị thì mình đi sớm qua Mỹ, qua Canada. Còn trường hợp không phải cái diện đó thì mình lại bị ở trên đảo, có người ở tới 5-7 năm luôn.
Whatever the reason might have been, right? Maybe they were being persecuted, or maybe they escaped because they did not believe in the values of now the communist state, or maybe they left for economic reasons. Whatever it might be, they all left during a certain time frame, and they all I think everyone that I've met describes themselves as of the boat people, right? So rather than fragmenting one another or dividing one another based on who they were prior to, I would say there's a solidarity and unity in the fact that they are all boat people.
I think one example that I remember was when I was talking to my uncle, and I asked him, okay, what language do you think in? And my uncle said, oh, I still think in Vietnamese. Like even though he speaks very, very fluent English and he barely has a Vietnamese accent, it's like, oh, I still think in Vietnamese because I was raised and born in Vietnam. Or when I think about like a cultural or national identity, it'd first be Canadian, just because I've grown up in Canada and I'm more innately aware about Canadian customs and stuff. But then if I go into like my cultural background, I would also identify as Vietnamese because I also identify with a lot of like the Vietnamese experiences, specifically those of like Vietnamese people that came to Canada, because we have a different experience, I feel, from like just people who for like many generations have lived in Canada, or like people in Vietnam who've lived in Vietnam for many generations.
I remember in elementary, like that whole middle school time where you're like trying to like fit in and be cool. There was no way you could, because like you were distinct, you were different, right? Like you can't change the fact that you're Viet. And I do remember this one time in my early childhood, I was trying to feel like, I was upset with the fact that I was Asian. This is before I embraced it. I was upset with the fact that I was Asian and I looked different. And I was trying to think to myself, like, if I could change my face to any face I wanted, what would it look like? And that's when I realized that there is no generic fitting in face. Like, we are all unique in our own ways. So that's when I started like embracing, like, I am unique. Like, everybody is unique in their own ways. And that's something we should embrace. It's not the fact that we should all be the same person.
Yeah, I don't describe myself via the hyphenation. I describe myself instead as a Canadian with Vietnamese and Chinese heritage.
Okay.
It's a clear distinction for me because I was the first of my family to be born and raised here. I am Canadian with a Vietnamese last name, with a Vietnamese heritage, raised with Vietnamese culture, but alongside Canadian culture, right? And so that's why I don't believe the hyphenation is something that reflects my identity.
Rarely, I don't ever think I've heard my parents complain about racism, but at the same time, it's one of those things where their generation worked hard to survive, to make our lives easier, so they said their bar was so low, like their bar was to survive, so that our bar was a little higher, where it's like we can be part of Canadian culture. So now that for them, their struggles was not assimilation, their struggle was to live. So that's why they don't complain about racism or anything like that. Whereas our generation, yeah, sure, some people may complain that, oh, you guys are being like wusses because you're complaining about racism when I have to worry about like feeding myself. But at the same time, like that, you worked hard so that we wouldn't have to worry about putting food on the table. So that you moved the bar up for us so that we can move the bar up even farther. So that we're not starting at point 0 when we grow up, we're starting at point 10 already.
Well, I don't think it's often, at least in an urban center like Toronto, where you have sort of overt racism, right? I think 20 years ago, Canada was a very different place. Today, we celebrate different backgrounds, different thoughts, different perspectives that often come from different cultural backgrounds. I mean, if you want to be superficial, it's different skin colors and differences in how we look. But it's obviously deeper than that, right? But back then, that wasn't viewed as a strength. That was viewed as, that was viewed more from a negative perspective around, oh, you are different. You are not familiar with Canadian society. You do not know our values. You do not know our etiquette and what's appropriate or not. And so I think those are all barriers to overcome. My generation is better as a result of my parents' generation having had to trailblaze through and forge that path. Just like how subsequent generations, like my kids and their kids, should be better off, provided that my generation is able to work to continue this path towards celebrating diversity.
About being, what should you do? Like our generation as our second generations. I think one of the things that really reminded me, because I never had a story like most Miklo students where I lived in 5 different countries, but I do have an experience of having family here in Montreal, growing up in Ottawa, basically spent more time in Quebec City and Victoria than I have in Ottawa since graduating high school. So I've been around Canada a lot. And for me, I identify not as an Ottawan or Montrealer or Quebecer or Ontarian, but I identify as a Canadian because I've just been to so many parts of Canada at this point. But at the same time, it's always, you remember, the one thing that hit me this summer was my friend who has a similar story to me, and the thing that he told me is, the reason why this came up is because he was wearing a Halifax shirt. I'm like, no, Cameron, you're from Ottawa. And he's like, no, I'm from Halifax. Always remember where home is. Always remember where you're from. So it's important to appreciate the fact that I'm now Canadian. I live across Canada, but to always remember that, like, our true origins, where